There's a quiet lie many of us carry. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells you that you're only visiting this life, that sooner or later someone will tap you on the shoulder and say you don't belong here. Maybe you've felt it in a room full of people, maybe at work, maybe in love, maybe even in your own dreams. You look around and think everyone else fits. They speak confidently, walk comfortably, exist naturally, and somehow you feel like an exception. But let me tell you something simple, something real. You don't need permission to exist. You don't need approval to take up space, and you don't need to earn your right to be here. If you're breathing, if you're trying, if you're still standing after everything you've been through, then this moment, this place, this life already chose you. And today we're not here to become someone else. We're here to remember what we forgot. You belong here. There is a feeling that doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't crash into your life or announce itself. It slips in quietly and makes itself comfortable without asking. It shows up when you walk into a room and suddenly become aware of your hands, your voice, your posture, your presence. It shows up when you hesitate before speaking, not because you don't know what to say, but because you're not sure you're allowed to say it. It's the feeling that tells you that you're standing somewhere you haven't earned, that you're occupying space meant for someone more qualified, more confident, more complete. You don't remember when it started. Maybe it was small at first. Maybe it was just a passing thought. Maybe it came from being compared to someone else, or being overlooked, or being told, directly or indirectly, that you were too much or not enough. Maybe it grew slowly, shaped by moments you dismissed as insignificant, a look that lingered too long, a silence where encouragement should have been, a door that closed without explanation, and over time, that feeling learned how to speak in your voice. It learned how to sound reasonable. It learned how to say things like, maybe this isn't for you, or you're lucky to even be here, or don't get too comfortable. It learned how to disguise itself as humility, as realism, as caution. It learned how to convince you that doubt was wisdom and self-erasure was maturity. So you adapted. You learned how to shrink yourself just enough to fit expectations. You learned how to enter spaces quietly and leave without being noticed. You learned how to laugh at jokes that didn't sit right with you. You learned how to downplay your strengths before anyone else could question them. You learned how to apologize for existing in ways that required attention. You became skilled at survival, but survival has a cost. Because every time you told yourself you didn't belong, a part of you stepped back. Every time you chose silence over expression, a part of you went unused. Every time you waited for permission that never came, something inside you learned to stay still, and stillness, when it's not chosen, becomes heavy. You see it in the way people carry themselves, shoulders slightly rounded, eyes scanning rooms instead of settling, voices that soften at the end of sentences, as if asking for approval. You see it in yourself when you hesitate to claim joy, when you delay celebration, when you treat your own presence like a temporary arrangement, as if someone might knock at any moment, as if this life is something you're borrowing. But here's the truth that often gets buried under years of quiet doubt. You didn't wander into your life by accident. You didn't sneak past some invisible gatekeeper. You didn't slip through a crack in the universe unnoticed. You are here because life made room for you. Before you had language, before you had proof, before you had achievements or explanations, you were already allowed to exist. Your breath didn't require justification. Your presence didn't require credentials. You didn't have to demonstrate value in order to take up space. And yet, somewhere along the way, you were taught to believe otherwise. You were taught that belonging is conditional, that it must be earned, defended, maintained, that it depends on performance, usefulness, likability, that one wrong move could expose you as an outsider, so you became careful not to fail too publicly, careful not to want too much, careful not to assume you deserve what others seem to receive effortlessly. You watched people who seemed comfortable in their skin and assumed they had something you didn't. some secret confidence, some internal permission slip, some unshakable certainty that told them they were allowed to be here. But what you didn't see were their doubts, their private battles, their own moments of standing on the edge of belonging and wondering if they'd fall through. The difference wasn't worthiness. The difference was belief. Belief is quiet, but it's powerful. It shapes posture. It shapes decisions. It shapes how long someone stays in the room after they feel uncomfortable. It shapes whether someone speaks, when their voice trembles or retreats into silence. When you believe you belong, you don't wait for the room to validate you. You meet the moment as an equal participant. You allow yourself to be seen without rehearsing excuses. You understand that discomfort doesn't mean exclusion, that uncertainty doesn't mean rejection. When you don't believe you belong, every interaction feels like a test you didn't study for. Every mistake feels like evidence. Every pause feels like judgment, and that belief becomes a lens. Through it, neutral expressions look like disapproval. Through it, feedback sounds like dismissal. Through it, success feels temporary and failure feels permanent. You start living defensively, even when no one is attacking. But the quiet truth is this: belonging isn't something the world gives you after careful evaluation. It's something you decide before the evaluation even begins. It's an internal stance, not an external reward. You don't belong because you're flawless. You don't belong because you're exceptional. You don't belong because you fit perfectly into existing shapes. You belong because you are here. And being here is not a small thing. Think about how much has happened just to bring you to this moment. Think about the layers of chance, resilience, timing, and survival that exist beneath your feet. Think about the number of moments you could have disappeared, given up, stepped aside, chosen not to continue. But you didn't, even when you were tired, even when you were unsure, even when you felt invisible. You stayed. That matters. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demands applause, but in a quiet, grounded way that recognizes endurance as its own kind of strength. The feeling of belonging often comes from comparing your internal experience to other people's external presentation. You compare your doubts to their confidence, your confusion to their clarity, your pauses to their momentum, and in that comparison, you always come up short because you're measuring different things. You know your inner storms. You only see their calm surface, so you assume the difference means something about your worth. But worth was never the variable. Belonging doesn't require you to be fearless. It requires you to be present. It doesn't require certainty. It requires honesty. It doesn't require perfection. It requires participation. And participation doesn't mean you always know what you're doing. It means you show up anyway. You show up with questions. You show up with half-formed ideas. You show up with nervous energy and open hands. You show up as you are. There's a particular courage in staying when you feel out of place. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands recognition, the quiet kind that says, I'm going to remain here even if I don't feel comfortable yet. The kind that understands that comfort is not the entry requirement, but often the result. Every space you admire was once unfamiliar. Every role you aspire to once felt undeserved. Every version of yourself you respect once felt unreachable. Growth doesn't happen in places where you feel fully qualified. It happens where you feel slightly unsteady, but willing. The voice that says you don't belong is not trying to protect you. It's trying to keep you small enough to feel safe. It equates familiarity with security and difference with danger. It would rather you stay invisible than risk being seen and misjudged. But invisibility has its own cost, because when you consistently deny yourself belonging, you don't just avoid rejection, you avoid connection, you avoid impact, you avoid the full weight of your own presence in the world. You become a visitor in your own life, and visitors don't rearrange furniture. Visitors don't speak up when something matters. Visitors don't imagine themselves staying long enough to make changes. They observe, they adapt, they leave, but you are not meant to pass through your life quietly. Not because you need to dominate or prove something, but because your perspective shaped by everything you've lived, adds something no one else can replace. The way you see things is not an inconvenience. It's not a flaw in the system. It's part of the system. Belonging doesn't mean everyone agrees with you. It means you don't disappear when they don't. It means you trust that disagreement doesn't erase your right to exist in the conversation. It means you understand that discomfort is not a signal to retreat, but often a sign that something meaningful is happening. When you let go of the need to earn your place, something shifts. Your body relaxes, your breath deepens, your voice steadies, not because fear is gone, but because it's no longer in control. You stop asking, "Do I belong here?" and start asking, "What can I bring to this moment?" That question changes everything because it moves you from defense to contribution, from self-monitoring to engagement, from hiding to participating. And participation doesn't require certainty. It requires willingness. Willingness to be seen before you feel ready. Willingness to speak before your voice stops shaking. Willingness to stay when the room feels unfamiliar. Belonging grows through use. The more you occupy your space, the more natural it feels. The more natural it feels, the less you question it. The less you question it, the more fully you show up, and slowly, quietly, without a dramatic turning point, the narrative changes. The room doesn't feel like it's tolerating you. Your life doesn't feel like it's on loan. Your presence doesn't feel like an apology. It feels grounded, not because the doubt disappeared, but because it no longer gets the final word. You begin to recognize that the voice telling you that you don't belong learned its lines from past experiences that no longer in your present. You can listen without obeying. You can acknowledge without retreating. You can stand where you are without justification. And standing doesn't always look confident. Sometimes it looks like staying seated when you want to leave. Sometimes it looks like raising your hand even when your heart races. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm still learning," without translating that into, "I shouldn't be here." Learning is not disqualification. It's evidence of engagement. The idea that you must already be complete before you belong is one of the most convincing lies we carry. But completeness is not a prerequisite for presence. Growth assumes incompleteness. Belonging makes space for it. You are not behind, you are not late, you are not an error in the design. You are a participant in an unfolding process, and processes don't ask permission to continue. They move forward, adapting, changing, learning as they go. So when that familiar doubt shows up, when it tells you that you're out of place, that you're only here by accident, that you should stay quiet and grateful and small, you don't need to fight it aggressively. You don't need to silence it completely. You just don't need to step aside for it. You can let it speak while you remain where you are. You can acknowledge its presence without letting it dictate your position. You can stay because staying is an act of belonging. Staying in conversations that challenge you. Staying in rooms where you're still learning the language. Staying in your own life even when you don't feel fully settled. You belong here not because you've figured everything out, but because you're willing to keep showing up in the middle of not knowing, in the middle of becoming, in the middle of learning how to stand comfortably in your own presence, in the middle of discovering that the space you occupy has been yours the entire time, even when it felt unfamiliar, even when it felt undeserved, even when you questioned whether you should remain, even when the voice whispered that you were temporary, because the truth continues quietly underneath all of it, steady and unchanged, waiting to be recognized rather than earned, waiting to be lived rather than proven, waiting to be claimed, not through permission, but through presence, through breath, through the simple act of not leaving when you feel unsure, through allowing yourself to exist fully in the moment without shrinking, without apologizing, without preparing an exit, while the feeling of belonging grows not as a sudden realization, but as a gradual settling into the understanding that you are already standing exactly where your life has led you, and that standing itself is enough. There comes a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp, when you realize that waiting for permission has shaped more of your life than you ever intended. Permission to speak, permission to try, permission to take up space without explaining yourself. It's not always obvious because it doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like being polite. It feels like being patient. It feels like being realistic about your place in the world. You tell yourself you're just being careful, that you're respecting boundaries, that you're not pushing too hard or asking for too much. But underneath that restraint is a quiet habit of stepping back before anyone asks you to, of lowering your hand before it's noticed, of choosing the edges of rooms instead of the center, not because you prefer them, but because they feel safer. Safety becomes a substitute for belonging, and over time, you start mistaking permission for legitimacy. You begin to believe that if no one explicitly invites you forward, you must not be meant to step there. You read silence as instruction. You interpret neutrality as rejection. You internalize the idea that confidence should be granted externally rather than built internally. So you wait. You wait for someone to notice your effort. You wait for someone to recognize your readiness. You wait for someone to tell you that now, finally, you're allowed. But permission rarely arrives the way we imagine it will. It doesn't come as a clear signal or a formal invitation. Most of the time, it never comes at all, not because you're unworthy, but because the world assumes you'll claim your place the same way others do, by stepping into it. The truth is, many of the people you think were chosen weren't chosen. They chose themselves. They didn't feel fully prepared. They didn't feel immune to doubt. They simply stopped asking whether they were allowed and started acting as if they were responsible for their voice, responsible for their presence, responsible for what they carried into the space. Reclaiming your place doesn't mean forcing yourself into rooms where you don't belong. It means recognizing that if you are already in the room, your presence is not a mistake. It means understanding that existing there is not an accident to apologize for, but a reality to stand in. Permission seeking often disguises itself as humility, but humility is not self-erasure. Humility doesn't require you to shrink or disappear. It allows you to stand fully as yourself while remaining open to learning. It doesn't ask you to pretend you're less capable than you are. It doesn't ask you to deny your experiences or your insights. When you stop waiting for permission, something shifts internally. You stop scanning faces for approval before you speak. You stop rehearsing your right to exist. You stop negotiating your presence like it's a temporary arrangement. Instead, you arrive. Arriving doesn't mean being loud. It doesn't mean dominating attention. It means being settled enough in yourself that you don't need external validation to stay grounded. It means you're no longer asking the room to confirm your worth before you contribute. You begin to understand that confidence is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to move forward despite it. That legitimacy doesn't come from being flawless, but from being engaged. That authority grows not from permission, but from responsibility. Responsibility for showing up honestly, responsibility for using your voice when it matters, responsibility for staying present, even when it feels uncomfortable. There is a quiet fear beneath permission seeking that rarely gets acknowledged, the fear that if you claim your place and fail, you'll confirm every doubt you've ever had about yourself. That if you step forward without being invited, you'll be exposed as someone who overestimated their worth. So it feels safer to stay in waiting mode, because waiting protects you from rejection, but it also protects you from participation. And participation is where life happens. You don't discover whether you belong by standing back and observing. You discover it by engaging, by contributing, by letting yourself be part of the process rather than a spectator. You learn where you fit by moving, not by hesitating. Claiming your place doesn't require certainty, it requires trust. Trust that you can learn as you go. Trust that mistakes don't disqualify you. Trust that growth doesn't happen in isolation. Can you reclaim your place without permission? You stop measuring yourself against imagined standards. You stop asking whether you're enough for the space and start asking how you can be useful within it. That shift turns anxiety into purpose. Purpose steadies you. It steadies your voice when you speak. It steadies your body when you enter unfamiliar spaces. It steadies your mind when doubt tries to pull you backward. You begin to notice that many of the barriers you thought were external were actually internal hesitations shaped by past experiences, moments when stepping forward felt risky, moments when visibility came with consequences, moments when silence seemed like the smarter choice. Those moments taught you caution, but caution, when carried too long, becomes confinement. Reclaiming your place means updating your instincts. It means recognizing that the strategies that once protected you may now be limiting you. It means understanding that safety is not the same as fulfillment. Fulfillment requires presence. Presence means allowing yourself to be seen before you feel perfect. It means speaking before your ideas feel fully polished. It means participating even when your voice shakes slightly, even when your thoughts are still forming, even when you're aware of your own uncertainty. You don't wait until you feel like you belong to start acting like you do. Acting like you belong is how the feeling develops. Belonging is not a prerequisite, it's a result. When you reclaim your place, you stop treating opportunities like favors. You stop approaching your own life as if it's something you're borrowing. You begin to understand that your role is not to be grateful for scraps of inclusion, but to contribute meaningfully to the spaces you occupy. This doesn't mean entitlement, it means ownership. Ownership of your effort, your learning, your growth. Ownership of the fact that you are part of the environment you're in, not an accessory to it. You don't need to justify your curiosity. You don't need to apologize for your ambition. You don't need to minimize your impact to make others comfortable. Reclaiming your place also means accepting that not everyone will approve, and that's not a failure. Approval is not the measure of belonging. Alignment is. Some spaces will resonate with you, some won't. Some people will welcome your presence. Some will resist it. None of that changes your right to stand where you are and explore what's possible. When you stop waiting for permission, rejection loses its power. It becomes information, not a verdict. It tells you where energy flows and where it doesn't. It helps you refine, not retreat. You begin to move through the world with a different posture, less guarded, less tentative, more rooted. You still listen, you still learn. You no longer shrink to avoid friction. You understand that growth creates friction, that contribution disrupts equilibrium, that claiming space changes dynamics, and that's not something to fear, because spaces that can't accommodate growth were never meant to hold you permanently. Reclaiming your place is not about forcing yourself to fit everywhere. It's about refusing to disappear anywhere. It's about trusting that your presence has value even before it's validated. You start to notice how often you used to hold back, how often you edited yourself, how often you delayed action because you were waiting to feel more confident, more ready, more certain. And you realize that readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision to engage, a decision to learn publicly, a decision to take responsibility for your place in the moment. The more you make that decision, the less foreign it feels. The less foreign it feels, the more natural it becomes. And the more natural it becomes, the less you question it. You stop asking for permission because you no longer see yourself as an outsider asking to be let in. You see yourself as a participant already inside, choosing how to contribute. That shift doesn't erase fear, it reframes it. Fear becomes a sign that something matters, not that something is wrong. It becomes energy instead of an obstacle. You carry yourself differently when you know you don't need approval to remain. You listen more deeply. You speak more honestly. You take feedback without collapsing under it, because you're no longer defending your right to be there. You're simply being there. And being there fully, without apology, without shrinking, without waiting to be invited, changes how the world responds to you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, consistently. in ways that feel earned rather than granted as you continue to show up, to contribute, to learn, to take responsibility for your place, to stand where you are without asking whether you're allowed, to recognize that permission was never the missing piece, that it was always about trust, about presence, about deciding to remain visible even when it felt uncomfortable, even when old habits pulled you toward the edges, even when the voice inside suggested waiting a little longer, because reclaiming your place is not a single moment, but a repeated choice, made quietly, daily, through action rather than declaration, through staying engaged rather than stepping back, through occupying your life as if it truly belongs to you. There is a difference between being present in your life and actually living inside it. Many people move through their days physically here, but emotionally elsewhere, half available, half withdrawn, as if they're keeping a safe distance from their own existence. They show up, they function, they fulfill responsibilities, but they don't fully arrive. They stay slightly detached, ready to step back if things become too intense, too uncertain, too real. This distance doesn't come from laziness or indifference. It comes from caution, from the belief that staying fully present requires a confidence you're not sure you have, from the fear that if you invest too deeply, you might expose how unsure you really feel, from the habit of protecting yourself by remaining partially unseen, so you live with one foot in and one foot out. You commit, but not completely. You hope, but not openly. You try, but with an escape route prepared. It feels responsible, it feels controlled, but over time it drains color from your life. Moments blur together, achievements feel muted, connections feel distant even when they're close. You're involved but not immersed. Living fully in the space you already occupy begins with noticing how often you withhold yourself, how often you delay enthusiasm, how often you brace for disappointment before anything has actually gone wrong, how often you limit your own engagement to avoid feeling foolish, vulnerable, or exposed. This withholding becomes second nature. You don't announce it. You don't even consciously choose it. It shows up in small ways, in how quickly you change the subject when something matters to you, in how you soften your excitement so it doesn't attract too much attention, in how you downplay moments that deserve to be felt deeply. You convince yourself that staying measured is maturity, that emotional distance equals stability, that keeping your expectations low will keep you safe. But safety, when taken too far, becomes isolation. And isolation doesn't always look lonely. Sometimes it looks calm. Sometimes it looks composed. Sometimes it looks like someone who seems fine but feels disconnected from their own experience. Living fully doesn't require dramatic changes. It requires honesty. Honesty about what you want, about what you feel, about what matters to you, even if you're not sure how it will turn out. When you start living inside your life rather than around it, you stop treating moments like they're disposable. You stop assuming there will always be a better time later. You recognize that presence is not something you earn after everything is figured out. It's something you practice now. Presence asks you to stay with discomfort instead of numbing it, to feel excitement without immediately questioning whether it's justified, to allow joy without anticipating its loss. This is difficult because presence removes the buffer. It puts you in direct contact with uncertainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. It doesn't offer guarantees. It doesn't promise outcomes, but it does offer aliveness. Aliveness doesn't mean constant happiness. It means depth. It means texture. It means feeling the full range of your experience rather than skimming across the surface. When you allow yourself to live fully, you accept that not every moment will be controlled or polished. Some will be awkward, some will be intense, some will challenge the version of yourself that prefers predictability. But avoiding intensity doesn't make life easier. It makes it thinner. You can see the difference in how people listen. Some listen while preparing their exit. Others listen as if the moment deserves their full attention. You can see it in how people speak. Some speak cautiously, measuring every word. Others speak with grounded openness, not because they're reckless, but because they trust themselves to handle what comes next. That trust is built through participation. The more you allow yourself to engage fully, the more capable you become of handling complexity. The more capable you become, the less you feel the need to hold back. And the less you hold back, the more natural full presence feels. Living fully also means letting go of the idea that you must perform your life correctly, that there's a right way to experience things, that emotions should be managed quickly and efficiently. Some moments are meant to linger. Some questions are meant to remain unanswered for a while. Some feelings need space rather than solutions. When you stop rushing yourself through experience, you start noticing subtleties you used to miss. The weight of a pause, the meaning in a glance, the significance of small choices. You begin to understand that your life is not a rehearsal. It's not a draft version waiting to be perfected. It's happening now in its current form, with its current uncertainties, with you exactly as you are. Living fully in the space you already occupy means accepting that you don't need to become someone else before your life begins. You don't need to reach a future version of yourself to deserve presence. You don't need to wait until you feel more confident, more secure, more certain you live now. That doesn't mean ignoring growth. It means allowing growth to happen inside your current reality rather than postponing life until growth is complete. When you stop holding yourself at a distance, your relationships change. You listen more deeply. You respond more honestly. You allow yourself to be affected rather than remaining untouched. That vulnerability strengthens connection rather than weakening it. It also changes how you experience success and failure. Success becomes something you feel rather than just acknowledge. Failure becomes something you learn from rather than something you use to withdraw. You begin to notice how often you used to disengage at the first sign of discomfort, how quickly you would distract yourself, how easily you would rationalize stepping back. And you realize that many of those moments were invitations to deepen your experience, invitations to stay present a little longer, invitations to step into your life rather than around it. Living fully doesn't mean forcing intensity. It means allowing authenticity. It means responding to what's actually happening rather than managing impressions. When you live this way, you stop treating your emotions like inconveniences. You see them as information. You let them inform your choices rather than dictate them. You also become more patient with yourself because presence reveals complexity. It shows you that growth is not linear, that confidence fluctuates, that certainty comes and goes, and that's not failure. That's reality. Living fully requires compassion. Compassion for your own inconsistencies, compassion for the parts of you that hesitate, compassion for the moments when you retreat and then choose to return, because presence is not permanent. It's practiced. Some days you'll feel deeply engaged. Other days you'll feel distant. What matters is not perfection, but willingness. Willingness to notice when you've stepped back. Willingness to re-enter without judgment. You don't punish yourself for drifting. You simply come back, and coming back is an act of belonging. When you live fully in the space you already occupy, you stop treating your life like something you need to earn. You stop delaying joy. You stop rationing your attention. You stop living as if the most important moments are always somewhere else. You realize that the ordinary is not empty. It's layered. That meaning doesn't always arrive dramatically. It often unfolds quietly through sustained presence. The more you allow yourself to live this way, the less you feel like an observer, the more you feel like a participant. The more you participate, the more connected you feel to your own experience, and connection brings weight to your actions. It makes your choices feel intentional. It makes your time feel inhabited rather than spent. You start to recognize that belonging is not just about being allowed into spaces. It's about staying present once you're there. It's about inhabiting your life fully rather than standing on the threshold. And as you do that, as you remain present without rushing away, as you allow moments to unfold without constantly managing them, as you accept uncertainty without retreating, you find that life begins to meet you where you are. with a depth you couldn't access before, with a sense of groundedness that doesn't come from control, but from engagement, from allowing yourself to feel, to respond, to remain, to occupy your space with attention rather than hesitation, to live not on the edges of your own experience, but within it, fully, honestly, without waiting for a future version of yourself to arrive before you begin.